The neon sign above the entrance flickered, casting a sickly green glow across the mud-caked street of Port Zeta Major. The sign, depicting a bulbous, multi-tentacled creature clutching a frothy mug, buzzed with the sound of dying insects. To the average galactic citizen, the drowned kraken was a hole, a place where beings went to forget their problems or acquire new, more violent ones. To Jax, a human cargo hauler for the Viridian Line, it was just a landmark on his way back to the starport. He was tired, his bones aching after a 16-hour shift of loading cryo units, and his only thought was of the cramped but quiet bunk on his ship, the Gilded Lily. He made a wrong turn. The main thoroughfare, the Glimner Way, was under repair, a yawning chasm of sparking conduits and humming maintenance droids. The detour signs are written in a bureaucratic dialect of galactic standard he could barely parse, had directed him down a series of increasingly narrow and dimly lit alleyways. He was pretty sure he was heading in the right direction, but the architecture of the port's underbelly all looked the same: grimy permacrete, hissing steam vents, and the ever-present smell of recycled air and strange spices. Then the rain started. Not the gentle mist of the upper levels, but a thick, greasy chemical downpour that stung the eyes. Cursing under his breath, Jax spotted the gaudy neon of the drowned kraken and made a dash for it. He wasn't a drinker, not really, but he'd wait out the worst of the acid rain under its awning. He pushed open the heavy, airtight door and stepped inside. The atmosphere hit him like a physical wall. It was thick with the smell of ozone and fermented algae and the cloying musk of a dozen different species. The air hummed with the low murmur of guttural conversations and the clinking of glasses. It took his human eyes a moment to adjust from the gloom of the alley. When they did, he realized the entire bar had gone silent. Every single head, stalk, and optical sensor was swiveled in his direction. He saw a hulking, gray-skinned brute with 4 arms, each one ending in a fist the size of a cinder block. He saw a lithe, iridescent Selexian with shifting patterns of warning colors crawling across her skin. At a corner table, a trio of scaly, reptilian Cathar watched him with unblinking, vertical slit eyes. Behind the bar, a massive, gelatinous being that Jax assumed was the bartender pulsed with a soft, internal light. Jax froze, one hand still on the door handle. And the silence was absolute. He was an anomaly, a soft skin, a hairless ape from a backwater planet that had only recently stumbled into the galactic community. In a bar like this, on the edge of civilized space, humans weren't just strangers. They were prey. They were known for being fragile, for not having the natural armor or venom or psychic abilities that were common among the older races. They were, in the collective consciousness of the galaxy, a pathetic species that had gotten lucky. The moment stretched, taut as a wire. Then a low chuckle rumbled from the back of the room. A Zith, a avian-looking creature with sharp beak and gleaming eyes, hopped down from a high stool. His feathers ruffled in what Jax recognized as a sign of amusement. "Well, well," the Zith cawed, his voice a grating screech. "Well, looks like someone's lost their mama. You sure you're in the right place, little mammal? The milk bar is 2 levels up." A wave of harsh, barking laughter broke the silence. The tension eased, but it was replaced by a more dangerous energy, the casual cruelty of a predator toying with a cornered animal. The brute flexed his 4 massive hands, the knuckles cracking like small-caliber gunfire. The Selexian's color patterns shifted to a vibrant, pulsing red, a sign of excitement. Jax's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and run back into the acid rain. But the rain was acid, and running would just confirm what they already thought. He was prey. His mind, a product of millions of years of evolution on a death world, kicked into a different gear. It was a gear his ancestors had used to outsmart saber-toothed cats and woolly mammoths. It was the gear of the underdog, the persistence hunter, the being who didn't have fangs or claws but had an unyielding will to survive. He let go of the door handle. It clanged shut behind him, sealing his fate. He didn't look at the Zith. He walked, with as much casual confidence as he could muster, towards the bar. His legs felt like they were made of jelly, but he forced them to move in a straight line. He could feel their eyes on him, boring into his back. He reached the bar and hopped onto a stool. The gelatinous bartender pulsed a lazy yellow, a questioning color. "What's your poison, soft skin?" Its voice vibrated, not through the air but directly into Jax's skull. "Trenian firewater," Jax said, his voice barely a croak. But he cleared his throat and said it again, louder. "Trenian firewater. Neat." The bar erupted again. Trenian firewater was a joke. It was a notoriously potent solvent used to clean engine parts with an alcohol content that could strip the enamel from a Varrock's teeth. Only the hardiest of species, like the brutes, could drink it without their internal organs dissolving. The gelatinous bartender pulsed a deep, amused purple. It extruded a pseudopod, retrieved a grimy bottle from a high shelf, and poured a thick, oily amber liquid into a glass that looked like it had been carved from a block of salt. It slid the glass across the bar. Jax picked it up. The smell alone was enough to make his eyes water. It was like sniffing a fuel line. He knew, on a purely biological level, that this was a terrible idea. But he also knew that the galactic perception of humans was that they were weak, fragile, and slow. They didn't know about the human liver. They didn't know about the thousands of years of evolution dedicated to processing toxins, a legacy of a time when early hominids had to eat rotten meat and fermented fruit to survive. They didn't know that a human's ability to consume and process alcohol was, by galactic standards, a superpower. He lifted the glass, nodded to the now silent room, and downed the entire contents in one gulp. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then the fire hit. It wasn't a burn, it was an explosion. It felt like a star had ignited in his esophagus and was now supernovaing in his stomach. His eyes bulged, his face turned a deep crimson, and for a terrifying moment he was sure he was about to die. And he gasped, a ragged wheezing sound, and slammed the glass back onto the bar. A tear, involuntary and acidic, rolled down his cheek. He let out a long, slow, shaky breath. He blinked. Then he looked at the gelatinous bartender, his vision slightly blurry but his mind strangely clear. "Not bad," he rasped. "A little weak. You got anything with a real kick?" The silence that followed was so profound, Jax could hear the hum of the cooling unit behind the bar. The brute's jaw, all four of them, went slack. The Slexian's colors swirled into a confused, mottled gray. The Zith's beak clacked shut with an audible snap. A human, a fragile little human, had just downed a glass of Trenian firewater like it was a glass of water, and then asked for something stronger. The illusion shattered. The predator became the puzzled observer. This wasn't right. This wasn't in the data files. The brute, whose name was Gravok, was the first to recover. This was an insult, a personal challenge. He rose from his seat, his massive form blocking out the flickering light of the neon sign. He lumbered towards the bar, his heavy footsteps making the metal floor vibrate. He leaned down, bringing his face, a granite-like slab of gray flesh with 4 small, piggy eyes, close to Jax's. His breath smelled like a slaughterhouse. "You think you're tough, soft skin?" he rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. "You think drinking our poison makes you one of us?" Jax didn't flinch. He'd stared down Viridian line supervisors who were far more terrifying. "I think," he said calmly, "that I'm just a guy trying to get out of the rain. I'm not trying to be one of you." "I'm happy being me." "Being you," Gravok sneered. "A fragile little thing. One flick from me and your bones would turn to dust." He raised one of his massive hands, the size of a dinner plate, and brought it down on the bar. The thick composite material cracked under the impact, a spiderweb of fractures spreading out from the point of contact. Jax looked at the cracked bar, then back at Gravok. He didn't see a terrifying monster. He saw a bully, and he'd dealt with bullies before. They relied on fear. If you took the fear away, they had nothing. "That's impressive," Jax said, his voice steady. "You're very strong. But can you do this?" He picked up his empty glass and, with a flick of his wrist, threw it against the far wall. It shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. The bar's patrons flinched. Then Jax hopped off his stool. But he walked over to the wall, picked up a long, sharp shard of the broken glass, and walked back to Gravok. He held it up. "See this?" he asked. He then took the shard and, with a swift, decisive motion, sliced it across the palm of his own left hand. A line of bright red blood welled up, stark against his skin. A collective gasp went through the bar. The Cathar hissed. Self-mutilation was a sign of the deepest insanity to them. The Selexians' colors bleached to a horrified white. Jax held out his bleeding hand, letting the blood drip onto the floor. "I bleed," he said. "I'm fragile. You're right. One flick and my bones might break." He looked Gravok directly in his 4 eyes. "But what you don't understand is that breaking is just part of the process for us. We break, we bleed, we get hurt, and then we get back up. We fix it. Oh, we come back stronger. Can you say the same? If I cut your hide, would it heal as fast? If I broke one of your arms, would you be able to fix it and keep fighting? Our bodies are built to be broken, but our will, that's unbreakable." He wasn't just talking to Gravok anymore. He was talking to the whole bar. He was rewriting the narrative. He wasn't showing them his strength. He was showing them his species-defining characteristic, persistence, the ability to endure, to adapt, to overcome through sheer, stubborn refusal to quit. It was a concept so alien to most of these species, who relied on natural defenses and overwhelming power, that it left them speechless. The Zith, whose name was Kirk, hopped forward, his head tilted. "A fascinating philosophical point, Mammal, but philosophy won't stop a fist." He gestured to Gravok. "The brute is still angry. He still wants to see if your will is as strong as you claim." Gravok, spurred on by Kirk's words, took a step forward. Jax sighed. He'd hoped the demonstration would be enough. He looked at the massive creature looming over him, then at the cracked bar, then back at his own bleeding hand. He had no weapons. He had no backup. He was alone, unarmed, and facing a creature that could literally crush his skull with one hand. He also had an exit strategy. He'd spent his whole life in situations where he was outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. He'd learned that the biggest muscle wasn't always the one that won the fight. Sometimes it was the one between the ears. He looked at the gelatinous bartender. "Hey," he said, his voice calm. Is that door behind you the way to the back alley?" The bartender pulsed a confused, affirmative blue. Jax nodded. He turned back to Gravok, who was now within arm's reach. The brute's 4 hands were clenched into fists, ready to strike. "You know," Jax said conversationally, "the thing about a bar fight is that it's loud. It attracts attention. And on a port like this, the attention it attracts is usually from the port authorities." He pointed a thumb towards the front door. "That door is the only way in or out, besides the one behind the bar. So, if a big, noisy fight breaks out, the authorities are going to come through that door." He then pointed to the door behind the bartender. "And that door, I'm guessing, leads to an alley where a smart guy could make a run for it while the big, noisy distraction is happening." Gravok stopped. He processed this. His 4 little eyes darted from Jax to the front door to the back door and back to Jax. The logic was simple and inescapable. "So here's the deal," Jax continued, wiping his bloody hand on his pants. "You can hit me. Maybe you'll even kill me. But while you're doing that, I'm going to be making a hell of a lot of noise. I'll knock over tables. I'll smash chairs. I'll scream like a banshee. And when the authorities come in that front door, you're going to be standing over my dead body. You'll get arrested. Your record, which I'm betting is already long enough, will get longer. You'll spend the next 10 years in a high-gravity penal colony breaking rocks. Or, he gestured towards the back door. You can let me walk out that door. I go quietly, you go back to your drink, and nobody's night gets any more complicated. What's it going to be? The bar was utterly silent. Every being was watching Gravok, waiting to see what he would do. The brute's face, usually a mask of simple rage, was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Anger, confusion, and a grudging respect warred for dominance. He'd never been outthought in a bar fight before. He'd never had his own self-interest so clearly laid out for him by his intended victim. The human hadn't cowered. He hadn't begged. He'd offered him a way out that saved face. It was a move so unexpected, so utterly alien, that it short-circuited his brain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Gravok let out a rumbling sigh. The tension drained from his massive shoulders. He looked at Jax, and a flicker of something that might have been admiration shone in his 4 eyes. "You are not what I expected, soft skin," he rumbled. "You have a hard shell for one so soft." He stepped aside, giving Jax a clear path to the bar and the back door. Jax nodded. "The name's Jax. And thanks." He didn't run. He walked calmly and deliberately towards the bar. He gave the gelatinous bartender a small wave. "Thanks for the drink." He pushed open the back door and stepped out into the alley. The acid rain had stopped, replaced by the humid, metallic-tasting air of the port's underbelly. He took a deep, shaky breath. His hand was throbbing, his heart was pounding, and his throat still felt like he'd swallowed a welding torch. But he was alive. He heard the door open behind him. He tensed, ready to run. But it wasn't Gravok. It was the Zith, a Kirk. The avian creature hopped out into the alley, his sharp eyes gleaming in the dim light. "That was a very impressive display, Jax," Kirk cawed softly. "Most impressive. You have a mind for strategy, and a stomach for our firewater." He hopped closer. "A valuable combination. You know, a being with your talents could find profitable work in this sector, work that doesn't involve loading cargo." Jax looked at the Zith, seeing him for what he was. An information broker, a fixer, a denizen of the shadowy spaces between the stars. He was offering Jax a door into a different world. Jax thought about it for a moment. He thought about his cramped bunk, his ungrateful supervisors, the endless, mind-numbing cycle of loading and unloading. Then he thought about the look in Gravok's eyes, the shift from contempt to respect. And he'd proven something tonight, not just to them, but to himself. He was more than just a cargo hauler. He was a human. He looked back at Kirk and gave him a tired but genuine smile. "I'll keep it in mind," he said. "Right now, I just want to find my ship." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the labyrinthine alleyways of Port Zeta Major. Behind him, in the drowned Kraken, the conversation slowly resumed, but it was different. The topic wasn't the latest cargo shipment or the price of spice. It was the human, the strange, fragile, terrifyingly resilient human who had walked into their bar, drank their poison, cut his own flesh, and talked a brute out of a fight. The legend of the human who stepped into the wrong saloon had just begun. And across the bar, Gravok looked at the cracked bar top, then at his own 4 massive hands. See, again, for the first time in a long time, he felt something he couldn't quite identify. It was a feeling he would later learn to call uncertainty.